paddle till sun and away broke over the river.
Tragedy today in Wellington Harbour. The inter-island ferry Wahine foundered off Fort Dorset with 744 passengers and crew aboard. There's been serious loss of life, but exact details are not yet available. It's known at least 40 are dead, but this figure could be much higher. Hundreds of survivors are in hospitals and emergency centres in Wellington and the Hut. First indication of trouble came as the Wahine, on its way north from Lyttelton, tried to enter the harbour in a storm with winds gusting to 100 knots. The vessel hit Barrett Reef, but managed to get clear, and for most of the morning lay about a quarter of a mile off Fort Dorset with her anchors dragging.
Shipwreck Tale today. No prizes for guessing. It's in very recent memory, really. April 1968. The infamous wreck of the Wahine with significant loss of life. John McCrystal, it's still quite chilling hearing that audio.
Yeah, it sure is. It sends shivers up the spine, really.
Yeah. Okay. As usual, we'll start with the vessel herself.
Yeah, she's a Cook Strait ferry in many ways, although she was on the run between Lyttelton and Wellington. She was built for the Union Steamship Company in Scotland, as most of our vessels seem to have been on reflection. She's a biggie. She's 8,948 tonnes, 488 feet, which is roughly, I guess, 140 metres, around 20 metres in the beam, so 72 feet. The Union Steamship Company was running in those days in competition with New Zealand Rail, who had just begun their service across from Picton to Wellington. The Wahine was designed to go head-to-head with that service, and she was a roll-on, roll-off vessel, which means literally you can open a great big door at the stern and roll on and roll off. She's roughly the same size as the Arahura, which is still in service.
This is modern era, and safety measures and the standards for safety, lifeboats, etc., have been improved greatly from the somewhat laissez-faire days. There just weren't the lifeboats and safety precautions.
That's absolutely right. We've discussed a lot of shipwrecks now where safety standards were pretty much nil, really, and that was both due to technological limitations and also regulatory limitations. In the 20th century, of course, after 1912, which most people will associate with one shipwreck, which was the Titanic, the regulatory side of things got much tougher. And, of course, there was the rapid acceleration of technology due to both world wars. And we now had radar and excellent ship-to-shore communications. Watertight compartments were thought to be a good idea, so that if part of the hull were breached, other parts could be sealed off to retain buoyancy. She was a much safer vessel than pretty much anything people were sailing around in 100 years beforehand.
The Cook Strait, that area of water, famously can get pretty rough, but were people sailing in trepidation in those days? As people do today, I think because of the memory of the Wahine in many ways. Had there been other incidents with the ferry in bad weather?
Yeah, I'm not aware of any significant mishaps. The Wahine was a big, powerful vessel, and like the Inter-Islander today, you get aboard those things and they just feel like a seaborne apartment building or a seaborne office block in many ways. They seem completely unshakable. You have the complete sense of security, I suppose. But you're right, these days we're haunted by the memory of the Wahine, so it's possible to enter Cook Strait and know that no matter how safe you feel aboard the vessel, Cook Strait is capable of pulling the rug out from under anything, really.
Yeah, and it's exactly what happened. It just ran into this perfect storm in some ways. It must have been a hell of a journey. They left from Lyttelton, didn't they?
That's right. They left Lyttelton, routine departure, a little bit late, getting trains and trucks and cars and things aboard. Bit of a logistical nightmare, I would think, and she was 45 minutes odd after her scheduled departure time of 8 p.m, on April the 9th, 1968. She had 610 passengers aboard and 123 crew, and intriguingly, I've seen either one or two, but there were stowaways aboard, and these were seamen who just wanted basically to get a free passage across to their next gig. And so, yeah, there were 2 sailors aboard not known to the authorities. They chose a bad vessel to sneak aboard, I guess.
Good heavens.
Yes. There were, may or may not be significant, there were 74 odd cars, there were 17 containers and 4 trucks and a bunch of trailers on the vehicle deck. The main point of vulnerability with these vessels is that great big cavernous space, the vehicle deck, because you've got cargo there that can potentially shift, and you've also got a huge area in which water can accumulate if the drainage is compromised for any reason.
This famously and very tragically happened with the ferry out of, was it Amsterdam in the North Sea? Yeah.
That will be a fresh memory for most people. It seemed sort of unthinkable, and it was particularly terrifying for us because that vessel was so closely related to the vessels on which we ply Cook Strait. And yeah, it's that great big stern door. If that fails, your history. It's basically an invitation to the sea to come in to violate rule number 1 of seamanship: keep the ocean out of the boat.
Right. So, running into bad weather, was the cargo and all the cars that are in there and the containers and stuff that you're talking about, was that a factor because they could shift around?
Yeah, there was no particular concern throughout most of the passage up the east coast of the South Island. The weather was bad and it was predicted to get worse. I don't think anyone had any inkling whatsoever of just how bad it was going to get. But it was still blowing 40 to 50 knots, which is gale force, and there was a moderate sea running. No particular anxiety whatsoever. We say this so often in the preamble to these shipwreck stories. Yeah, as she approached Cook Strait, things began to deteriorate quite rapidly, and the captain sent a couple of men below to double the lashings on some of the vehicles, the heavier vehicles that were down there. This was at a point where they would normally be going below to remove the lashings so that people could drive them off at the other end. But conditions were looking ominous enough to just take that extra precaution.
How bad were the seas, do we know?
We don't really know. Some estimate that they were around sort of 9 to 10 metres, which is a big sea. Just from the evidence of what actually happened to this enormous vessel in the sea, you have to suspect that some of the waves were very much larger even than that. It's fair to say that at the height of the storm, the seas were just mountainous. They were the kind of thing that you would probably hope never to see in your own lifetime.
Had a ferry like that run in those sort of seas and that sort of weather before successfully?
This vessel was used to coping with very bad weather and very heavy seas, but this is still regarded as New Zealand's worst storm in recorded memory. The wind, for example, at the height, it still holds the records of the strongest wind gust, which is 275 kilometres per hour, Category 5 hurricane material.
Wow.
At Otauranga Bay, which is just along the south coast from the scene of this mishap, at pretty much exactly the same time. Incidentally, that's also where most of the wreckage and most of the survivors and the bodies from the Penguin were washed up in New Zealand's other great inter-island ferry disaster. This was a completely unprecedented storm. It sort of originated with a tropical cyclone way up to the east of Vanuatu. That made its way south and everyone was bracing for it and expecting it to be bad. And it was bad. It killed someone in Northland. It smashed most of the east coast of the North Island. But the trouble was there was another one coming up from the south, what Jim Hickey would probably call a polar rodent. The two converged, and meteorologists in their dramatic television manner tend to refer to these as weather bombs. Yeah, poor old Wahine was right at ground zero of this weather bomb. The two combined dramatically around 6 in the morning, just as the Wahine was passing Pencarrow Head.
That's something we haven't outlined. It was a night trip, wasn't it?
Yes, that's right. Should have mentioned that. Yeah, she left at 8 p.m. the previous evening. It's a fair haul from Lyttelton, so it tended to be done overnight as much as it was done during the day, and people could sleep. She was pretty full up with her sleeping accommodation, holding very much fewer people than you could put aboard during the day when everyone was expecting to be up and about. So 600 people, you had all these cabins, and most people were asleep in them at the time. So most pretty unsuspecting until things started going pear-shaped just after 6 in the morning, when some of them were thinking about getting up and getting ready for their arrival in Wellington.
Although it was one of, if not our worst storm It is always a confluence of events, an array of factors that go into creating a disaster that otherwise would not have even really made much of a headline other than difficult crossing.
That's right. They talk about systems failures these days, don't they? That it's a sort of a cascading chain of events that make everything go wrong. And yeah, that's precisely what happened here.
We'll take a break and we'll come back and outline how this ended up in awful disaster with some of the most compelling footage ever shot in New Zealand. We have some up on our video selection. Go to the Weekend Variety Wireless webpage. Just Google it, you'll get right there. We'll be back with the Wreck of the Wahine, 1968, April.
It's Graham Hill's Weekend Variety Wireless.
Very recent in our memories, and spooky as all hell. The Wreck of the Wahine, 1968. A record bad storm, one hell of a storm, but as we were mentioning before the break, it was a confluence of events which led to disaster.
Yep. 6:10 in the morning, just past Pencarrow Head, and the wind and the sea just dramatically increased. The master lost all visibility in the rain squall and with the spindrift from the sea whipped up by the wind, and then his radar went out. And who knows the reason for that? Presumably the wind just carried away the on-deck apparatus, and that was the end of that. So she's blind at this point. Already,
and what was the visibility then?
It's recorded as nil. You just couldn't see a thing.
Oh, hell.
So not a great situation to be in. He knew where he was, but when he lost it, but from that point on he was sailing blind. He had already reduced speed to half a head, being a prudent man. Should mention his name. It's Hector Robertson is his name, very experienced man. And very shortly after the radar went out, the ship broached, which is what the sea does when it picks up an object. Anyone who's been in a boat in a sea coming ashore will know exactly this feeling. It's where the wave picks you up from behind, and because the back of the boat's accelerating faster than the front, it goes sideways. And that's what happened to this massive 500-foot-long vessel. A sea seems to have picked her up, regardless of all her power and her steering gear, and just flung her 23 degrees off her intended course.
This is a massive concern, though, the Wahine. Are we talking a rogue wave or a seas? They can just do that.
Yeah, I guess what happens is you've got a few seas, and if they meet and reinforce, you just get the mother of all seas, and that just seems to be what happened. It could be a combination of a wind gust as well, because this is a big, high, slab-sided vessel and a lot of windage, so... And sea and wind were running from the same direction.
What does a captain do when your ship is broaching?
Right, well, you do what you instinctively do, and you turn your steering wheel. He ordered the helm over to try to correct this unintended manoeuvre, and nothing happened. So he quite ingeniously then ordered one of his two engines to be put into reverse to try to just go with the movement and turn it into his friend, in an attempt to turn his vessel sort of head to the sea, and then head back out into the open ocean, which is always regarded as the safer place for a ship to be, especially, of course, when you can't see anything.
Like when you don't know where you are in a light aeroplane fly over the sea. There are no mountains.
I would not like to experience that, but I imagine that's exactly it. Yep.
Describe what this must have looked like. There were moments in this massive sea where it would be a frightening, almost sickening sight to see the ship half out of the water. Absolutely,
and that's precisely what was happening. The reason she was losing steerage is because as her head went down, her stern came up, and quite often the propellers and the rudders were actually out of the water. So she probably had the use of both her power and her steering for only half of the time. Can you imagine what that would look like, a ship that size? If you picture one of the inter-island ferries sort of plunging in that manner, it beggars description in many ways. Yes, it does. Some military ships do that occasionally, but oh, good heavens, yeah, not this sort of thing. Yeah. And what seems to have happened then is, as she was performing this manoeuvre to try to head back to sea, she seems to have been picked up by a combination of wind and wave again and thrown bodily astern, such that she struck with her stern quarter. So that's the right-hand side of the back of the vessel, hit a submerged rock called Pinnacle Rock, which is just to the east of Barrett's Reef, which is on the western side of the entrance to Wellington's Harbour. That had the effect of smashing off one of her propellers and most of the propeller shaft. And, of course, with the propeller shaft gone, there's a hole admitting the sea, and water started pouring into the engine room.
And the weather's not getting any better.
The weather is getting worse at this point. The wind is estimated to be 70 to 80 knots, which is Category 1 or 2 hurricane force. And obviously no one has any sense of how big the seas are because they can't see them in the complete nil visibility that's prevailing at this stage as well.
Pardon my complete ignorance, but this sort of event happening, as you said, they've lost the propeller and smashed into this thing. The captain would know that the propeller's gone, that he hasn't got that power, and would have some indication of the damage done to his ship.
Yeah, that he wouldn't have been in much doubt that their situation was now extremely perilous, shall we say. So one can only imagine what his thoughts were. The moment she struck, of course, everyone aboard the bridge was just hurled across the bridge, and Robertson himself seems to have suffered quite bad injuries. He went the full width of the bridge, apparently, which is a good 20 metres, and fetched up, ironically enough, against the radar gear. He was pretty shaken and injured by that. Nonetheless, pretty much complete calm reigned on the bridge. They didn't sort of throw up their hands and cry in horror, this is the end of us. They got on with trying to preserve everything they could out of the situation. At 6:42 in the morning, they broadcast their first distress call, and this indicates, I guess, the blindness and the helplessness they were feeling. He radioed, "Going ashore, think near the heads." Think near the heads is a significant phrase. They don't know because they can't see. 8 minutes later, they then broadcast, "Our position is Barrett's Reef." So they knew exactly what they were striking. At this stage, they're being actually bodily dragged by the sea across the reef, some of which is underwater and some of which, of course, is visible. People looking out the windows could actually see the rocks, and everyone could hear the sort of rending, crunching noise of the hull going over the seabed.
And this means she's taking on water.
Yes, water is starting to penetrate the hull. Robertson orders the watertight compartments closed, all the watertight doors closed, and he sends someone down to have a look on the vehicle deck and assess the state of that. Captain James Kirk of the Enterprise, every time something crashes into it or whatever, yells out, "Give me a status report." That's precisely what Robertson did. He dispatched people to all parts of the ship to get a sense of just how bad things were. Of course, the next thing to go wrong for him is that the water in the engine room flooded the port engine, the good engine, with the propeller still attached, and that failed. So they're on emergency lighting now, and they've got no propulsion left whatsoever, and no steering. So they're at the mercy of wind and sea.
They've got anchors.
They've got anchors, exactly. There's only one thing left to try, and that's the anchors, and that's precisely what they do. Anchoring a vessel of this size doesn't involve just picking it up out of the forepeak and hurling it overboard. The boatswain and the first officer were sent along the deck to remove what are known as the compressors, which are great big iron bars that hold the chain down to keep the tension on the anchor chains, the anchors hanging outside the vessel on the outside of the hull. That was an incredibly dangerous thing to be doing in those seas, and both of them nearly lost their lives a couple of times in the attempt. They managed it, and the anchors were dropped. It took about 20 minutes, in the course of which the Wahine had pretty much completely dragged right over Barrett's Reef and was now heading what seemed inexorably towards the next nasty bit of the coast here, called Point Dorset, which is really the western head on the entrance to Wellington Harbour.
That would have been worse.
Yeah, had they hit there in those seas and with no visibility, probably someone might have survived, but they would have been outrageously lucky. Nasty piece of coast exposed to the full fury of the storm, and yeah, just no hope really. But miraculously, as it seems, the anchors, while they didn't hold the vessel, they slowed her progress down, and they had the very desirable effect of turning her nose to face the weather. She seems to have kept quite a lot of buoyancy and was riding the swell relatively well. And so while all of the passengers upon first impact had been ordered to muster at their various stations in their life jackets, there was no thought to abandoning the ship at this point, because by far the safest place was aboard the ship as long as she was afloat and on an even keel.
They would have been petrified, though. They know what's going on now.
Yeah. There was criticism made of the crew that perhaps more information should have been given to them, but I completely accept the captain's defence to that, which is if you go telling everyone everything that's happening and what the dangers are, there'd just be complete panic. Whereas there were a couple of people actually going around taking photographs throughout this, and most of the passengers seem to have managed to raise a smile for the camera. There's just still the sense that a vessel this big cannot sink. We can't be in the kind of trouble that you might have been in a smaller vessel in these awful conditions.
I'm not digging for ghoulishness, but the pictures that survived of this moment on board, did they survive?
Yeah, they did. I don't know that everyone taking photos got their film off, but two men, a man by the name of, again, Robertson, no relation to the captain, and a man by the name of Hendy, both survived and they both got their cameras off. They're haunting images, they really are. There's a dramatic one taken of the abandoned ship moment, but for me, probably the most haunting one of all is there's a picture of a little girl, little 3-year-old girl. There were 46 children under the age of 14 aboard the Wahine, and there's this little 3-year-old girl by the name of Alma Hick, and she's looking solemn. She's not looking too frightened. She's not looking too upset. She just looks very solemn, and for me, it's, hard to look at because she's the spitting image of my own daughter, who's just a fraction older.
Spooky. We'll have that photograph up on the webpage too if you want just a little extra to fill out the image, but our imagination and your description doing a fine job. John McCrystal, the wreck of the Wahine today for our Shipwreck Tale, and when we come back, where the real tragedy struck, so many lost their lives in this appalling weather in Wellington Harbour.
First indication of trouble came as the Wahine, on its way north from Lyttelton, tried to enter the harbour in a storm with winds gusting to 100 knots. The vessel hit Barrett Reef, but managed to get clear, and for most of the morning lay about a quarter of a mile off Port Dorset with her anchors dragging.
It's Graham Hill's Weekend Variety Wireless.
The wreck of the Wahine today with John McCrystal. Appalling weather, Wellington, 1968, founded on Barrett's Reef. Haunting images because we have moving images, of course, of this disaster. There's something so spooky about this one. For me, John, I think some of it, of course, the tragedy, but the size of the ship as well. It has a sort of a gruesome effect.
It's got a World Trade Center. This is the biggest building on Earth. Nothing can touch it, feel to it, I suppose. It's human hubris. It's the sense that we are the masters of our domain, I guess. And nature's got a way of setting us right on that score from time to time. There
was the distress call made pretty early in the scheme of things when they didn't know where they were. What about rescue attempts? I mean, the sea is the same for everybody out there. How would they be able to go out and rescue?
It's, just one of those things that there's always someone brave enough to have a go. The particular bravery was shown, I think, by people in private craft who answered the call to go out and have a look. A bunch of trawlers did, and the two official attempts, the ones that were deployed as part of the official response to the situation, where the pilots launched. The Tiakina was sent out with a fellow by the name of Captain William Galloway aboard. And there was also a tug called the Tapui set off as well. The poor old Tapui, on her way out, she was blown bodily through 360 degrees by the wind. She just didn't have the power, and again, she was sort of pitch poling, so her propellers and rudder were leaving the water as often as they were in it. And she went through 3 full 360s through complete loss of control due to the weather.
Good God.
Still, they persisted and they got there, and somehow they got a rocket with a line aboard Wahine, which by now was just past Point Dorset and officially in the harbour. It's in Wellington Harbour. And the idea was that while the vessel is still afloat and still on an even keel, they can drag her to safety. There was no way the poor little Tapui was going to manage that. But they got a line aboard and they prepared to set about having a go. But pretty much as soon as it was made fast at both ends, another one of these monstrous seas that no one can see, but the effects speak for themselves. It picked the Tapui up and just drove her astern. The line came up taut and just broke. So that was that. So the Tapui sought shelter to prepare her equipment for another go.
Is the Wahine listing famously at this?
At this stage, she's on an even keel.
Good God.
But William Galloway aboard the Tiakina, I don't know whether you've ever seen harbour pilots in action in bad seas and bad conditions. They're incredible. Even today, it's one of the most dangerous jobs there is, I think. They drive their small boat alongside a large ship, and someone then has to just leap across onto a ladder and climb up. It's bad enough in sort of moderately bad conditions. In these freakish, extreme conditions that the Wahine is facing, you wouldn't even think of it really, except that Captain William Galloway did, the Deputy Harbour Master. The Tiakina managed to get right up alongside the Wahine, and the waves sort of brought the two hulls within 1 metre of one another, and he seized his moment and leapt out and grabbed onto a rope lifeboat ladder hanging over the side and started climbing up. He slipped a couple of times, and it looked like he was certain to fall into the sea and be crushed between the two boats, but he managed to get aboard, made his way onto the bridge and said, "Captain William Galloway here, reporting. If I can be of any assistance, do let me know." And on the way up, he felt that the Wahine was beginning to list, which means to lean over to starboard. He reckoned about 5 degrees, although of course she's rolling in these big seas and it's difficult to say for sure. So this is the first sign of real trouble. If they can't rely on the buoyancy and stability of the vessel, then things are getting worse. So what's happening now is conditions are continuing to deteriorate, and it becomes, over the course of the next half hour, it becomes absolutely irrefutable that the list is increasing.
And what is happening to the passengers?
Yeah, the passengers themselves are aware that things are not looking too good, because the curtains in the main saloon, in the smoke room and the other rooms where they're mustered, they can see the curtains and the angle at which they're hanging to the vertical, and they know that the vessel is starting to lean over. So there comes a moment where, ironically, the weather starts to improve, and that makes the Wahine situation worse. What's happened here is the phenomenon known as storm surge, where the enormous force of the wind has driven a huge volume of water into Wellington Harbour over the course of the storm, and now that the wind begins to abate, that water starts finding its way back out to sea. And so whereas the Wahine was facing with her bows toward where the wind was coming from, the weight of all this water rushing out past her now swings her broadside on to the weather. And of course, the weather is now assisting to push her over to the side she's trying to lean anyway. Water's getting onto the vehicle deck, and stuff that's broken loose and spilled from vehicles is blocking the drains, and so a large volume of water is now accumulating on the vehicle deck, and that's beginning to drag her over. The list increases to around 25 degrees, so it goes from slight to quite severe in the course of 30 minutes. But with her broadside on to the wind, the port side is now relatively sheltered, and Robertson seizes the moment and gives the awful order, "Abandon ship." Panic ensues, as you'd expect. The moment the order is given, the ship actually lurches as if to indicate to everyone that really it is time to go.
I suspect, John, sorry to interrupt, but we have this enduring image of the Wahine sitting there on its side in Wellington Harbour for so long, like it's just so in your face. This order to abandon ship, I mean, this was the best protocol at the time because no one knew what was going to happen?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. No, it's just a prudent decision under the prevailing circumstances.
Okay.
The vessel is no longer stable, so it's no longer safe to be aboard. If she goes over with everyone aboard, then they're lost.
Okay.
There's no hope of rescue. As it is, the starboard lifeboat's useless to them.
They'd be underwater, wouldn't they?
Yes. Well, in fact, they're on the high side of the vessel, actually.
Okay.
The ones on the other side can be launched, and they very quickly are.
Okay.
Life rafts are deployed, but some of them, when they're inflated, just turn into giant kites, and away they go. Luckily, they've got lifeboats for Africa aboard, as everyone does since 1912, so there's plenty of flotation available, and people are got into these as quickly as absolutely possible. Now, I mentioned poor little Elma Hick, this 3-year-old. She's travelling with her 2 siblings, a 1-year-old infant by the name of Gordon, and her older brother by the name of David, and her mother, Shirley Hick, who's also pregnant. She had the experience, as a lot of the passengers did, of not hearing the order to go to the port side to evacuate, and so she went to the wrong side. And so she was on the high side of the vessel, and it became clear that there was no abandoned ship attempts happening there. A male passenger came and told her that everyone was on the other side getting into the boats, and offered to take one of the children. Her 6-year-old was capable of making his own way. She wasn't letting her baby go, so that left little Elma. And Elma began to cry and didn't want to go, but her mother snapped at her and said, "You've got to go." And so off Elma went with this stranger. Down they went. David was got onto a boat by a steward. Another steward took little Gordon, the 1-year-old from Shirley, put a life jacket on him. The life jacket didn't fit, but it was the best available. And then the steward, a man by the name of Brian McMaster, heroically got into the sea, basically, with Gordon, and floated on his back, kicked his way clear of the vessel, with Gordon on his stomach. Yeah, it's all the more remarkable when you reflect that McMaster couldn't swim, and the only thing he was relying on here was his life jacket. And what a brave thing to do.
Yeah.
Shirley, meanwhile, has got into a lifeboat, and the lifeboat capsizes. She gets into the water herself, and she can hear Gordon crying as he's being taken away, but she can't see him. So she's got none of her children with her now, and the only one she has any contact with, she can hear crying in the distance, and then the crying stops. So she, at this point, thinks she's lost all 3 children. She's assisted aboard a lifeboat, which then promptly capsizes. And then she's in the water, but is rescued, and then the vessel that rescues her takes her to the ferry wharf, ironically, where she should have been landing anyway. She's taken to Hutt Hospital when it's found she's pregnant, and while she's there, she learns that there's an infant in Wellington Hospital who may or may not be her baby. There's no word of Elma, but she's told that her eldest child, David, is alive. So, yeah, you can pause for a moment, I guess, to reflect on her feelings through all this, but yeah, there you go.
Where was the major loss of life? People simply taking their chances in the sea?
Yeah, people have got aboard the life rafts, and the lucky ones were picked up by the flotilla of pleasure craft and trawlers and what have you that are out there assisting in these awful conditions. Anyone who stayed aboard one of these rafts or who wasn't taken out of the sea was likely to lose their life, because what happened now, as we've noted, all this water is rushing out of Wellington Harbour, and instead of taking them to Seatoon Beach, which is what the wind would indicate would happen, everyone's being dragged to the opposite shore, to the Eastbourne side, which is a pretty nasty coast in its own right, and it's cut off from the rest of Wellington by damage from the storm. There's foot access only, and it's pretty unpopulated there anyway at this point in history. So people are being swept ashore in these enormous seas. It's sort of estimated between 6 and 9 metres, times larger. Some of the bodies that were later found were actually washed up onto the hillside, so they bypassed the beach altogether and were sort of festooning the cliffs.
And they just didn't have lifeboats to get into, or the lifeboats were capsizing?
Yep, that's right. Life rafts that made it this far were tipped over in the surf, and your chances of survival were remote then. What
was the loss of life in the end, and how long before were all the bodies found?
Most of the bodies of those who were found, 6 remain missing. They were never found. The official toll at the time was 51, but that's been increased officially these days to 53. Remarkably, because little Gordon Hick, whom I've mentioned, made it to Wellington Hospital alive. He was rescued out of the sea. He was swept off McMaster's stomach by a big sea. McMaster couldn't find him again, and when he was picked up by a lifeboat, the baby looked dead in the bilge of the lifeboat. He was subsequently resuscitated, but was severely brain damaged, and he died of complications directly arising from that 21 years later in 1990. So he became the 52nd victim, official victim. Poor little guy.
John McCrystal, the Wahine disaster, 1968. We'll take our final break and come back and wrap up the outcome of this dreadful tragedy in a record storm in Wellington.
Then, early this afternoon, came the first sign of real trouble as the Wahine took a sudden list. Soon the water deck was down to water level and life rafts and boats went into the water. Reports say some of the lifeboats were swept onto rocks. This was one of the luckier ones.
Radio Live.
It's Graham Hill's Weekend Variety Wireless.
The wreck of the Wahine today. John McCrystal, anything more you want to say?
just like to reflect a little bit in the time remaining on the rescuers, because in many ways this tragedy was as hard on the rescuers as it was on the victims. There were a couple of policemen were dispatched to Eastbourne. They made their way on foot. They were getting around the coast and figured that no one was going to wash up on this coast because they weren't seeing anyone. They came around the corner and they discovered a scene of absolute carnage. There were people walking past them still wearing life jackets, and in some sort of surreal cases even carrying handbags and things like that, just looking vacant, shocked, injured, just absolutely traumatised. There were bodies on the beach, and even worse, there were survivors still coming ashore. But these seas are enormous, and they're pounding onto a vicious bit of coast. It's very rocky. Even the beaches are festooned with rocks. And the testimony of one of the rescuers, a policeman by the name of Ray Whittam, he at one stage saw a man just about safe. He was driven onto the shore by a wave. Whittam reached a hand to help him. Another wave came in, took him out. Next wave brought him back in, dashed him on the rocks and killed him. Whittam also assisted an elderly lady to the top of the beach and sat her down. The woman wouldn't let him go. She was crying and terrified. Whittam calmed her down a bit and then wrenched his hand out of her grip and went down to continue helping. When he came back, she was dead. Another awful story of his, one of the crewmen of the Wahine was washed up, very badly injured to his lower abdomen. Whittam carried him up the beach, tried to make him comfortable, and the man died in his arms. It's unimaginable stuff, this. It's right on my doorstep here. I can almost see where this happened from where I sit.
And it remained in your face for a long time, that ship.
She sat there on the side for a year until another storm, nearly as bad as the one that killed her, came along and just smashed her to pieces. And then she was cut up and turned into reinforcing steel.
Was there an inquiry for finding any fault other than it was bad weather and bad luck?
Yeah, as is customary, the officers were charged with various things and they were all acquitted because in the end no one could get past the fact that this was an act of God. Good old God. It was a storm that no one could have predicted in those days, probably not even now. Just a series of unfortunate events made it impossible for the outcome to have been otherwise.
And those images are burnt on our minds through television throughout the country. I can't imagine what it must have been like for those who were there, and I'm sure someone was there that is listening tonight. John McCrystal, thank you very much.
Thanks, Graham.
Police and rescue workers stood up to shoulder deep in the surf to carry the shot and the injured to waiting ambulances and buses.
When they abandoned ship, me and my mate said we'll grab a kid each. He grabbed a kid, I grabbed a kid. I lost mine when she went. And Laurie, I haven't seen him since.
No one was left behind, were they?
As far as I know, there's quite a lot out there in jackets.
In the water?